I've been thinking a lot about visibility lately, about what it means to be seen versus what it means to exist. There's a difference I've learned. You can walk through your entire life as background noise, the guy holding the coffee behind the protagonist in someone else's photograph, the blur in the corner of a security feed that nobody bothers to pause on. You can pay taxes, maintain a credit score, show up to your nephew's birthday party with an appropriate gift, and still amount to nothing more than white noise and the frequency of other people's lives. My name is Nolan Graves. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent the last 12 years watching people who don't know they're being watched. Private investigation sounds glamorous until you realize it's mostly sitting in parked cars with a lukewarm thermos and a bladder that's learned to negotiate. Cheating spouses, insurance frauds, custody battles where both parents are terrible but one is paying you. That's the work. That's my life. I live alone in the studio apartment in Glendale. The woman at the dry cleaner knows my name because I've been bringing the same 3 suits there for 6 years. The guy at the liquor store on Franklin knows I prefer bourbon, mid-shelf, nothing fancy. My dentist sends birthday cards. My mother calls every other Sunday, and I let half of those go to voicemail because I never know what to say to her anymore. I'm not telling you this to earn your sympathy. I'm telling you this because it matters. Because in a few paragraphs, you're going to wonder how someone like me could be so stupid, so careless, so willing to walk into something that was obviously wrong from the start. And I need you to understand that when you've spent a decade being invisible, truly invisible, not in the superpower way, but in the way that makes cashiers look past you while they hand over your change, you start to crave being noticed, even if the attention comes wrapped in red flags. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. No return address. My name typed on a label, the old-fashioned kind from a label maker that clicked each letter in the place. Inside, $10,000 in hundreds, a single photograph of a woman I recognized from billboards, and a letter written in handwriting so precise it looked almost printed. She wanted me to watch her, not investigate, not follow. Watch. The instructions were specific. The money was more than I'd made in the last 3 months combined, and the woman in the photograph, Celeste Morrow, darling of streaming platforms, face on magazine covers, 32 million Instagram followers, was asking me, specifically me, to observe her inside her home between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. No contact, no photographs, just watch and report through letters only. I should have thrown it away. I should have walked to the nearest precinct and handed over every last bill. But I didn't, because I was tired of being invisible. Because for once, someone had looked at the crowd and pointed directly at me. The first letter I sent back contained my terms. If this was legitimate, and I had serious doubts, I needed certain assurances. A way to verify she was actually Celeste Morrow. An explanation for why a woman worth 8 figures needed a mid-tier PI from Glendale to peer through her windows. Some indication that I wasn't being set up for a breaking and entering charge or worse. 3 days later, another envelope. Same typed label, same precise handwriting inside. Mr. Graves, verification enclosed. The reason is personal and not relevant to your task. You were recommended by a mutual acquaintance whose name I cannot share. I assure you this is not entrapment. I need to know what I do when I believe no one is watching. The address is 2847 Mulholland. There's a property under renovation 2 houses east, empty, no security system active. The roof access provides adequate sight lines. Begin Friday. Report what you observe, nothing more. C.M. The verification was a selfie. Celeste Morrow holding that day's Los Angeles Times, her face unfiltered, no makeup, looking directly into the camera with an expression I couldn't quite read. Tired, maybe, or something past tired. I told myself it was probably a publicity stunt, some kind of documentary project or research for a role. Actresses did stranger things. And $20,000 total, She'd included the second half with the photo, was enough to make me stop asking questions I didn't really want answered. Friday came. I drove up Mulholland after 11, found the renovation property exactly where she described. The construction crew had left scaffolding against the north side, and I climbed it with the practiced ease of a man who'd scaled his share of fire escapes. From the flat section of roof behind a half-finished chimney, I had a clean view into the back of Celeste Morrow's home. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the modern kind that rich people love because they've never had to worry about someone watching them. I sat at my camp chair, unfolded my thermal blanket, and pulled out my binoculars. She was already awake. At 12:17 a.m., Celeste Morrow stood in her kitchen eating cereal from the box, handfuls at a time, staring at nothing. She wasn't looking at her phone, wasn't watching television, just standing there, chewing, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the refrigerator. I made notes, timestamps, activities, duration, old habits. At 1:45, she moved to the living room and began doing yoga. Not the Instagram kind, no cute outfit, no ring light. She wore gray sweatpants and a shirt with a hole in the collar, and she held each pose for so long, I started to wonder if she'd fallen asleep in them. Downward dog for 11 minutes. Warrior 2 for nearly 15. Her body didn't shake, didn't waver. She held herself with the stillness of furniture. By 3 a.m., she was playing a card game at her dining table, alone, dealing hands to 4 empty chairs, picking up each hand in turn, playing the cards as if 4 different people were making decisions. She spoke while she did this. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but her mouth moved in conversation, responding to statements no one had made. At 4:22, she walked out of my sight line. A hallway on the east side of the house, leading somewhere I couldn't see. She didn't come back. I waited, adjusted my position, tried to find a new angle. Nothing. For an hour and 38 minutes, Celeste Morrow was simply gone, somewhere inside her own home where my eyes couldn't follow. She reappeared at 6 o'clock exactly, not 5:58, not 6:03, 6 on the dot, like an alarm had sounded that only she could hear. She walked back into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and sat on the stool watching the sunrise through those massive windows. I climbed down from the roof with stiff joints and a full notebook. The logical explanations were easy to construct. Insomnia, eccentricity, the particular loneliness of famous people who can't trust anyone enough to be weird around them. I wrote my first report in the parking lot of a diner off Laurel Canyon, 3 pages of clinical observations. But I kept thinking about that hallway, about where she went when she disappeared. The second night followed the same pattern. Different activities. She spent 2 hours arranging and rearranging books on a shelf, organizing them by some system I couldn't determine, then undoing it all and starting over. With the same structure. Awake at midnight, disappearing down that hallway around 4 a.m., returning at exactly 6. I sent my report. 3 days later, another envelope with another $5,000 and a note containing only 2 words. Keep watching. By the 4th night, I had started to notice the things that were missing. Celeste Morrow never looked at her phone. Not once. And 4 nights of observation did she pick up a device or sit in front of the computer. For a woman whose career depended on social media presence, whose Instagram showed daily updates and stories, this seemed wrong. Someone else was running those accounts. Someone else was being Celeste Morrow for the public, while the real woman stood in her kitchen at 2 a.m., folding the same towel over and over until the fabric began to fray. She never turned on music, never watched television. The massive screen mounted above her fireplace remained dark every night I watched. She moved through her home in silence, performing activities that seemed designed to fill time rather than accomplish anything. And she never slept. Not a nap on the couch, not a rest with her head on the table. For 6 hours every night, Celeste Morrow was awake and active, and I started to wonder what she did during the other 18 hours, whether she slept then, or whether sleep was something she'd abandoned entirely. The 5th night, I almost missed it. I'd gotten comfortable, complacent. My thermos was empty, and I was thinking about the breakfast burrito I'd pick up on the way home when I noticed her standing at the hallway entrance. Not walking toward it, just standing there, her back to me, her head tilted slightly to the left. She stayed like that for 3 minutes, I counted. Then she turned around and looked directly at me. I know that's not possible. I was 200 yards away, on a dark roof, dressed in black, behind a half-constructed chimney. There's no way she could have seen me. But she turned, and her eyes found the exact spot where I was sitting, and she smiled. Not a friendly smile, not the megawatt grin from her movie posters. This was something else. A slow spreading of lips that seemed to take too long, like her face was remembering how the expression was supposed to work. She raised one hand in a small wave, fingers curling in sequence, pinky to index, and then she walked down the hallway and disappeared. I didn't move for 20 minutes. My legs had locked up, knees pressed against the rough tile of the roof, binoculars still raised to my eyes even though there was nothing left to see. When I finally lowered them, my hands were cramped around the barrel like I'd been gripping a lifeline. She knew. She'd known the whole time. I drove home, telling myself it made sense. She'd hired me after all. She knew I'd be watching. Maybe she'd spotted me the first night, noticed a reflection or a movement. Maybe she had her own surveillance system, cameras I hadn't detected. The wave was her acknowledging the arrangement, nothing more. But the smile. I couldn't explain away the smile. I didn't send a report that night. Instead, I sat in my apartment with the lights off, drinking bourbon that didn't taste like anything, trying to figure out why a woman would pay a stranger $30,000 to watch her not sleep. The next envelope arrived Monday. I hadn't been back to Mulholland since that wave, and part of me hoped she'd fire me, find someone else, when they keep the money and walk away. Instead, there was another payment, another note. Why did you stop? I need you to see everything. Return tonight. Stay until dawn. Don't leave early again. There's something I want to show you. I should have burned the money and changed my address. I should have reported the whole thing to someone, the police, a lawyer, anyone with more sense than me. But $35,000 was sitting in a shoebox in my closet, and the woman in the photograph had looked at me, really looked at me, and that wave kept replaying in my mind, pinky to index, like she was counting down. I went back. The 6th night was different. I took my position on the roof at 11:40, earlier than usual, wanting to be settled before midnight. The renovation site remained untouched. No workers had appeared in over a week, and I'd started to wonder if the project had stalled, or if the property had always been empty, waiting for someone like me to need it. At 11:58, Celeste walked into her living room and sat down on the couch, facing the windows, facing me. She didn't do anything. No yoga, no card games, no compulsive organizing. She just sat there with her hands folded in her lap, watching the darkness outside. And I understood that tonight, the arrangement had reversed. She was observing me. For 3 hours, neither of us moved. I felt ridiculous, a grown man on a rooftop, engaged in a staring contest with a woman who couldn't actually see him. Except I was no longer certain about that last part. The rational explanations I'd constructed were getting harder to maintain. She sat with a patience that didn't feel human, a stillness so complete that I found myself checking through the binoculars to confirm she was breathing. She was. Barely. Her chest rose and fell at intervals that seemed too far apart, like someone rationing air. At 3:15, she stood up, She walked to the window, not near it, but directly against it, pressing her forehead to the glass. Her breath fogged a small circle, and she raised her finger and began to write. The letters were backwards from her perspective, correct from mine. W-A-T-C-H. She wiped the fog away and breathed again. T-H-E. Again. B-A-S-E-M-E-N-T. She stepped back from the window, smiled that wrong smile, and walked down the hallway. At 6 a.m., she didn't return. I sat on that roof until the sun was fully up, until joggers appeared on the street below, and a gardening truck pulled into a driveway 3 houses down. She never came back to the visible parts of the house. The kitchen remained empty. The living room stayed dark. My report that week was short. I didn't mention the message on the window. I didn't mention that I'd started researching Celeste Morrow's property records, looking for any mention of a basement in the house that, according to the original architectural plans filed with the city, didn't have one. The plans showed a single-story structure with a converted attic. No basement. No below-ground space of any kind. But the hallway she disappeared into every night led somewhere, and she wanted me to see it. Her next letter arrived with $10,000, the most she'd sent at once. You're ready now. Tuesday, 2 p.m. I'll be at the studio until evening. The spare key is under the 3rd stone from the garden gate. The alarm code is 0913. Find what I've been hiding from myself. I read that last line 4 times. Hiding from myself. Not hiding from you, or hiding from the world. From myself. Like she didn't know what was in her own house. Like she was hiring me to discover something she couldn't face directly. Tuesday came bright and warm, the kind of Los Angeles afternoon that makes you forget anything dark exists. I parked 2 streets away and walked to her property like I belonged there. Confidence is the best disguise. I learned that early in this job. Act like you have every right to be somewhere, and most people won't question it. The stone was where she'd said. The key was beneath it. The alarm beeped when I opened the door, and I punched in 0913 with fingers that wanted to shake, but didn't. September 13th. I wondered what the date meant to her. The house smelled like vanilla and something underneath it. Something older. Not rot exactly, but age. The kind of smell you find in rooms that have been closed too long, where the air has given up on being fresh. I moved through the space I'd only ever seen from outside. The kitchen where she'd eaten cereal by the handful. The living room where she'd sat watching nothing. Everything looked normal in daylight. Expensive furniture, tasteful art on the walls. The kind of curated perfection you see in magazine spreads. But the details were wrong. Every mirror in the house was covered. Sheets draped over bathroom mirrors, decorative mirrors in the hallway turned to face the wall. Even the small compact on her vanity had been taped shut. The photographs on her shelves, and there were dozens, and silver frames arranged with care, had all been reversed. I picked one up and turned it around to find Celeste at some premiere, smiling beside a man I recognized as her co-star from a film 2 years ago. I placed it back facing outward, and something in the room felt different, heavier. I turned it back around, picture facing the wall. The weight lifted. The hallway was longer than it looked from outside. That didn't make architectural sense, but I'd stopped expecting sense from this place. The walls were bare here, painted a shade of gray that seemed to absorb the light from the window at the far end. 4 doors. 3 of them open to ordinary rooms. A guest bedroom, a home office, a bathroom with its mirror covered like all the others. The 4th door was different. It was older than the house. I know how that sounds, but I'm telling you what I saw. The wood was dark and weathered, with grain patterns that suggested decades of existence, maybe centuries. The doorknob was black iron, cold when I touched it, and carved into its surface was a symbol I didn't recognize. Something circular, with lines radiating inward rather than outward, like a dream. The door opened on the stairs leading down. I stood at the top for a long time. The rational part of my brain was screaming now, pointing out that I was alone in the stranger's house, about to descend into a basement that didn't officially exist, following instructions from a woman whose behavior defied every pattern I understood. I could leave. I could take the $45,000 I'd already collected and disappear, move to another state, pretend none of this had happened. But she'd asked me to find what she was hiding from herself. And standing there at the top of those stairs, with a vanilla and age smell stronger now, rising from below like breath from a sleeping throat, I realized I needed to know. Not for the money. Not because she'd asked. Because for 6 nights, I'd watched a woman who didn't sleep, who played cards with invisible people, who breathed too slowly and smiled too wrong. And I needed to understand what could turn a person into that. What could hollow someone out until they became a performance of themselves. I started down the stairs. The stairs went down further than they should have. I counted 32 steps. For a basement beneath a single-story house, that meant I was descending at least 20 feet below ground level, deeper than any foundation in this part of the hills would reasonably go. The walls on either side were stone, not drywall or concrete, rough-hewn and damp to the touch. My phone's flashlight carved a weak cone through the darkness, catching dust motes that hung motionless in the air like they'd forgotten how to fall. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a space I couldn't immediately measure. My light didn't reach the walls, didn't reach the ceiling, just dissolved into a darkness that felt thick, like the air itself had texture. I took a step forward, and my foot knocked against something that rattled across the floor. I pointed the light down. Bones. Small ones. Delicate. Bird bones, maybe, or something else with hollow insides. They were arranged in a circle around where I stood. Hundreds of them. Tiny skulls and curved ribs forming a perimeter I'd stepped directly into the center of. My throat tightened. I wanted to step back, return to the stairs, but the thought felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. Instead, I moved forward, stepping over the bone circle, sweeping my light across the floor. The basement was large, much larger than the house above it, which made no sense. But I'd stopped trusting sense somewhere around the 15th step. The floor was packed earth, covered in markings, not painted but carved, grooves cut deep into the soil and filled with something that gleamed wetly in my phone's beam. The patterns weren't geometric, nothing as clean as symbols or sigils. They looked organic, like root systems or vein networks, branching and reconnecting in ways that hurt to follow. Against the far wall, I could make out shapes. Shelves, maybe, or altars. It was hard to tell. I walked toward them, my footsteps silent on the packed earth, my breath loud in my own ears. The first shelf held jars, dozens of them, glass containers of various sizes, each filled with liquid that ranged from pale yellow to deep rust. Some held objects I couldn't identify, lumps of tissue perhaps, or organs preserved in whatever solution kept them from decay. Others held things I could identify and wished I couldn't. A human tooth, molar with the root still attached, a lock of hair bound with red thread. What looked like a tongue, gray and curled, pressing against the glass like it was trying to escape. I didn't touch anything. My hands stayed at my sides, fingers curled into my palms, nails digging crescents into skin. The PI part of my brain was trying to document everything, to file it away for the report I'd never write, but the rest of me had gone quiet, watchful, like prey that's realized too late it walked into a den. The second shelf held books, old ones, covers made of leather or something that felt like leather, spines cracked and pages swollen with age. I opened one at random and found handwriting I couldn't read. Not because it was in another language, but because the letters seemed to shift when I looked at them directly. I could catch words in my peripheral vision, fragments that made no sense. Vessel, hollow, borrowed face. When I tried to focus on them, they scattered like roaches in sudden light. I closed the book, put it back, kept moving. The third shelf held photographs. These I understood. These were worse. Celeste Morrow, an image after image, but wrong. Her face in each photo was slightly different. Eyes a millimeter too wide, mouth tilted at angles that changed from frame to frame, features that seemed to be learning how to arrange themselves. The earliest photos showed something barely human, approximation of a woman that hadn't yet figured out where cheekbones belonged. The latest ones were almost perfect. Almost. I found one from what looked like last year, a red carpet event. Celeste smiling beside an older woman I didn't recognize. In the photo, her smile was flawless, but her shadow on the wall behind her wasn't smiling at all. My phone light flickered. The battery showed 40%, but the beam dimmed anyway, like something was drinking the electricity. I should leave. I knew I should leave. But there was one more section of the basement I hadn't explored, a corner where the darkness seemed to pool and thicken. And something in that corner was breathing. I heard it as I got closer. A soft, rhythmic sound, too slow to be normal, too wet to be mechanical. The kind of breathing you hear from someone deeply asleep, or deeply drugged, or something that had learned to imitate breathing without understanding why lungs needed air. I raised my phone. A woman sat in the corner, facing the wall. Her hair was dark, hanging past her shoulders. She wore a white dress, simple cotton, the kind of thing you'd sleep in. Her posture was wrong. Spine too straight, shoulders pulled back in a way that suggested strings rather than muscles. She sat on a wooden chair that looked as old as the door upstairs, and her bare feet rested on the earth floor, toes curled slightly like she was gripping the ground. From behind, she looked exactly like Celeste Morrow. I stood there, phone light trembling. Not my hands, the light itself. Like even photons didn't want to touch her. The breathing continued. Slow, wet. Each exhale slightly longer than made sense. Hello? My voice came out cracked, dry. I swallowed. Miss Morrow? The breathing stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. She didn't move, didn't speak. The silence in that basement was absolute, the kind of quiet that has weight, that presses against your eardrums like deep water. Then she spoke. I'm not the one you've been watching. Her voice was Celeste's, exactly Celeste's, the same timbre, the same slight rasp from years of dialogue coaching. But underneath it, layered beneath the familiar tones, I heard something else. A second voice, or maybe a third, harmonics that didn't belong to human vocal cords. It reminded me of feedback from the microphone, that squeal you get when two frequencies clash and produce something neither intended. I don't understand, I said. Stupid words, useless words, but my brain had stalled and my mouth was operating on backup power. You've been watching her, the woman said. The one wearing my face. The one who stole it so long ago, I forgot I ever had it. She started to turn. Not her body, her head. Just her head, rotating on her neck in a direction necks don't rotate. The motion smooth and continuous, like an owl tracking prey, like a security camera panning across a parking lot. I heard her vertebrae clicking, not cracking but clicking, a sound like someone running their finger along piano keys. Her head came around to face me, and I saw her smile. It was the smile from the window, the smile that took too long, that seemed to remember the shape of joy without understanding its meaning. But up close, in the dying light of my phone, I could see details I'd missed from 200 yards away. The way her lips stretched too far toward her ears, the way her teeth were uniform, identical, like they'd been installed rather than grown. The way her eyes were wrong. Not black, not empty. Worse. They were Celeste's eyes. The exact green hazel I'd seen in every photograph. But they were looking at me from a head that had rotated 180 degrees on a neck that should have snapped. And in those eyes, I saw hunger. Old hunger. Patient hunger. The hunger of something that had been waiting in this basement for exactly as long as it needed to wait. "Thank you for coming, Nolan," she said, with Celeste's voice, Celeste's stolen face. "We've been waiting for someone just like you." I ran. I made it 3 steps before she was on me. Not chasing. There was no sound of footsteps, no rush of movement. One moment I was running toward the stairs, and the next, something cold wrapped around my ankle and I was on the ground, packed earth against my face, phone skittering away into the darkness. The light spun as it tumbled, strobing across the basement ceiling, and in those flashes, I saw her. She wasn't walking. Her legs remained folded beneath her on the chair, but her upper body had extended, elongated, arms stretching like taffy pulled too far, fingers wrapped around my leg with a grip that felt like frozen steel cables. Her head still faced me, that smile still fixed in place, and her body was bridging the gap between the corner and where I had fallen. 15 feet of torso that bent and curved like a snake made of woman. I kicked, thrashed. My free leg connected with something that should have been her shoulder but felt like hitting a side of beef in a freezer. The cold spread from her touch, numbing my ankle, creeping up my calf. My hands scrabbled at the earth floor, fingers digging into the carved grooves, and whatever filled them was warm and slick, and I didn't want to think about what it was. No need to struggle. Her voice came from directly behind my head now, though I hadn't seen her move. "It's already done. It was done the moment you opened the first envelope." I twisted onto my back. She loomed above me, body still impossibly extended, face inches from mine. This close I could see the seams, faint lines around her hairline, around her jaw, around the edges of her eyes, places where the skin didn't quite connect, where whatever was underneath pressed against the mask it wore. She smelled like the house, vanilla and age, vanilla and something rotting sweetly beneath it. My hand found my belt, the revolver I carried for jobs that might go wrong. I'd never fired it at a person, only paper targets at the range on quiet Sunday mornings. I pulled it free, pressed the barrel against her chest and squeezed the trigger. The gun didn't fire. I pulled again. Again. The trigger moved, the hammer fell, but no explosion, no recoil, no bullet tearing through whatever this thing was. Just a soft click, over and over, like a broken toy. She laughed. It was Celeste's laugh, the one I'd heard in interviews, warm and genuine, but it went on too long and ended in a sound that wasn't laughter at all. A chittering, clicking noise that seemed to come from inside her throat, from multiple points at once. "Guns are such hopeful things," she said. "All that faith and physics, and cause and effect. But physics is a story, Nolan. A story people tell themselves to feel safe. Down here, we tell different stories." Her hand released my ankle and found my wrist instead. She lifted my arm, the one holding the useless revolver, and bent it backward. Not fast, slow, like she wanted me to feel every degree of rotation, every ligament stretching past its limit. Pain shot through my shoulder, my elbow, my wrist, white hot and absolute. I screamed. The sound bounced off the stone walls and came back changed, distorted, like the basement was swallowing my voice and returning something else. "You were chosen carefully," she said, still bending. "We needed someone invisible, someone the world wouldn't miss. Do you know how long I've watched you, Norlin? How many nights I've sat in the dark outside your apartment, learning the shape of your loneliness?" My wrist snapped. The revolver fell. I couldn't scream anymore. My throat had closed, my body dedicating every resource to processing agony I'd never imagined. "You eat alone. You drink alone. You spend hours following other people's lives because you have none of your own." Her face pressed closer, her breath cold against my cheek. "Your mother calls every other Sunday, and you ignore half of them. Your nephew doesn't remember your name. You've been disappearing for years, Nolan. We're just finishing what you started." She released my broken wrist and I cradled it against my chest, gasping. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the dirt from the floor. I could see my phone 10 feet away, its light still on, battery indicator blinking red like a dying heartbeat. "What are you?" The words came out wrecked, barely recognizable. "I'm what's left." She sat back, her body finally retracting, coiling in on itself until she was human-shaped again, or close enough. The original. The one who lived here before she came, before she needed a face to wear in the world above. She keeps me fed, keeps me company, and every few years, she brings me a gift. "Celeste," I said. "The real Celeste." There is no real Celeste. There never was. There was a woman named Miriam who built this house in 1931, who found something in the hills that should have stayed buried, who made a deal she didn't understand. The thing that wore Celeste's face smiled, and now I could see that the teeth weren't just uniform. They were growing, lengthening, crowding her mouth. I'm what was buried. She's what the deal became. And you're what keeps us fed. I tried to crawl. One arm useless, legs numb from the cold that had spread from her touch. I dragged myself toward the stairs with my one good hand, inches at a time, grooves in the floor scraping my stomach through my shirt. She watched me, let me struggle, let me reach the first step, and the second, let me believe for 10 agonizing seconds that I might make it. Then she was there, between me and the stairs, and she wasn't pretending anymore. Her face had split open, not along the seams I'd noticed before. Those were still there, still faintly visible, but down the center, forehead to chin, like a door swinging wide. Inside was darkness, not the absence of light, but something denser, a darkness that moved and pulsed and wanted. I saw shapes in it, or thought I did, glimpses of other faces, other victims, features that pressed against the inside of her skin like people drowning under ice. Thank you, Nolan. Her voice came from everywhere now, from the walls and the floor and the inside of my own skull. Your loneliness was exquisite. It seasoned you perfectly. Her hands, both of them, all of them, more than 2 now, sprouting from her sides and shoulders, and the darkness inside her open face, reached for me. I felt them on my legs, my chest, my throat. Cold fingers, too many fingers, finding pressure points in soft places and the spaces between my ribs. I thought about my mother, about the calls I'd let go to voicemail, about the birthday cards from my dentist that I threw away without reading, about every person who had tried, in their small ways, to see me, and how I had hidden from their sight because being invisible felt safer than being known. She was right. I'd been disappearing for years, erasing myself one ignored call at a time, one empty night at a time. I'd wanted so badly to be seen, and the first thing that truly looked at me was this. The cold reached my heart. The last thing I saw was her smile, still too wide, still wrong, spreading across the darkness where her face had been. The last thing I heard was her voice, soft and almost gentle. The ritual is complete. Death wasn't what I expected. I thought it would be nothing. A light switch flipped off, a movie ending mid-frame, consciousness simply stopping like a car running out of gas. That's what atheists believe, right? What I'd believed, and my lukewarm, never really thought about it way. No afterlife, no judgment, just an ending. But I didn't end. I became part of something else. The darkness she'd shown me, the pulsing void inside her open face, I was in it now. Or, I was it. The distinction didn't seem to matter anymore. I could feel the others around me, pressed close like commuters on a subway car, their thoughts rushing against mine in fragments. A man who'd been a plumber in 1967, a woman who'd worked as a secretary in 1984, a teenager from 2003 whose name had been Derek and who still screamed sometimes, silently, into the nothing we all shared. We were the seasoning, the fuel, the offerings that kept the engine running. And from inside the darkness, I could still see. The basement looked different from this angle, smaller, more contained. My body lay crumpled at the base of the stairs, one arm bent wrong, face pressed into the packed earth. I watched the creature that had killed me retract fully into itself, bones clicking back in the position, skin sealing over the void, until she looked human again, until she looked like Celeste. She sat in her chair in the corner and resumed her breathing, that slow, wet rhythm I'd heard before, waiting. An hour passed, maybe 2. Time moved strangely here, inside the dark. The others told me I'd get used to it, their voices overlapping in my head like radio stations bleeding together. Some of them had been here so long they'd forgotten what some might look like. Some of them had stopped forming words entirely, communicating only in pulses of emotion, fear, resignation, occasional sparks of rage that faded as quickly as they came. The door at the top of the stairs opened. Light spilled down, and through the creature's eyes, our eyes now, all of ours, I saw Celeste Morrow descend. She moved differently than the thing in the basement. Her steps were careful, precise, each footfall placed with intention. She wore clothes I recognized from her Instagram: designer jeans, a silk blouse, sunglasses pushed up on her head. She looked exactly like the woman on the billboards, the woman in the magazine covers. She looked human. But I could see the wrongness now. The way her joints bent a fraction of a second before her muscles moved. The way her eyes tracked the room without her head turning, pupils sliding independently like a chameleon's. The way she smiled when she saw my body. A smile that reached her eyes in the way that real smiles never do. "Was he difficult?" she asked. The creature in the corner, the original, the buried thing, the one who'd been Miriam before she was anything else, lifted her head. "Easier than most. Loneliness softens them, makes the boundaries porous." Celeste knelt beside my corpse. She touched my face with fingers that felt nothing like human fingers, though they looked like them, and I felt the touch from both sides, the cold pressure on dead skin, and the strange vibration of her contact rippling through the darkness where I now lived. "Perfect," she said. The timing is perfect. September 13th, 93 years since the first offering. 913. The alarm code. Not a random number, not a birthday, an anniversary. Will it be enough? The creature asked. For another decade at least. Celeste stood, brushing dirt from her designer jeans. I've already started the letters to the next one. A school teacher in Fresno, recently divorced, no children. Excellent candidate. I wanted to scream, to warn whoever she meant, whoever would receive envelopes with typed labels and too good to refuse offers. But I had no mouth anymore, no voice, only this half-existence inside the dark, watching through eyes that weren't mine. Celeste climbed the stairs and returned with supplies, plastic sheeting, industrial cleaner, heavy-duty garbage bags. She worked efficiently, wrapping my body like she'd done it before, because she had, I realized, many times over 93 years. The plumber in 1967, the secretary in 1984, Derek in 2003. All of us, rolled in plastic and carried away, our blood scrubbed from the earth floor with the same practiced motions. She hummed while she worked. That tune, da-da-da-da-da-dum. Soft and almost cheerful, like a woman tidying her kitchen after dinner. And the basement was clean. When every trace of Nolan Graves had been erased from the physical world, she stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked toward the creature in the corner. Same time tomorrow night? I'll be here. The creature's voice was my voice now too, threaded through with all the others. I'm always here. Celeste climbed the stairs. The door closed. The light disappeared. In the darkness, the creature settled back into her chair, and I felt us all settle with her. The plumber had given up on counting the days. The secretary recited poetry she'd memorized in high school, the same 3 stanzas over and over. Derek screamed. I thought about the school teacher in Fresno, about the letters she'd receive, the money she couldn't afford to refuse, the surveillance job that would lead her here, to this basement, to this corner, to us. I thought about my mother, still calling every other Sunday, still leaving voicemails I would never hear. I thought about how badly I'd wanted to be seen. The creature began to breathe again, slow, wet, patient. And in the darkness, where I'd taken my place among the others, I began to understand that this was forever. The nights resumed their pattern. From inside the creature, I watched Celeste, the thing wearing Celeste's face, move through her routines above us, eating cereal by the handful at midnight, holding yoga poses for 15 minutes at a time, playing cards with invisible partners who, I now understood, weren't invisible at all. She was playing with us, dealing hands to the dead, letting our trapped consciousnesses move the cards through her fingers while she practiced being human. She came down to the basement every night between 4 and 6 a.m. That was feeding time. Not feeding in any way I could describe with ordinary language. She didn't eat. The creature in the corner didn't consume physical matter. But something passed between them during those hours. Energy, essence, whatever you wanted to call the thing that kept them both alive. Celeste would sit in the second chair, the one that had always been empty when I watched from the roof, and the creature would extend thin tendrils of darkness from her open mouth, and they would connect. During the feeding, I could see through both of their eyes. I could feel what they felt. The creature's ancient hunger, never satisfied, only temporarily dulled. Celeste's strange half-existence, a mask animated by something that had forgotten what being alive actually meant. They needed each other. The creature provided the power. Celeste provided the interface with the world, the ability to hunt, to select, to lower new offerings into the basement. They'd been doing this since 1931. Miriam had been the first, both the first host and, in a sense, the first victim. She'd found the creature buried beneath her property during construction, had been foolish enough to dig it up, to try to communicate with it. The deal she'd made had cost her everything: her face, her identity, her humanity. She became Celeste's predecessor, a mask called Eleanor, who'd lived in this house until 1978, when the body wore out and needed replacing. The creature showed me this history during the long hours between feedings, showed all of us, cycling through memories like slides in the projector. Eleanor attending parties in the 1940s, laughing with a mouth that didn't belong to her. Eleanor bringing home a traveling salesman in 1952, his body never found. Eleanor growing old while the creature in the basement stayed the same, until finally, Eleanor's heart gave out, and they needed fresh material. A young actress had disappeared from a Hollywood party in 1978. The case went cold. The newspapers speculated about drugs, about organized crime, about the dark side of fame. No one suspected that she'd been chosen because her face was beautiful, and her family was distant, and her ambition had made her exactly the kind of lonely the creature preferred. Celeste Morrill had walked out of this house the next morning, wearing a stolen face, and she'd been wearing it ever since. 46 years. That's how long she'd been Celeste. 46 years of movies and magazine covers and red carpets. 46 years of pretending to age through careful makeup and strategic surgery. 46 years of feeding the thing in the basement with carefully selected offerings who wouldn't be missed. I was the latest, not the last. The schoolteacher's name was Patricia Odom. I learned this because Celeste spoke it aloud while writing her letters, sounding out the syllables like she was learning a new language. Dear Patricia, I have an unusual proposition. The same words I had received, the same typed label and the same kind of envelope, the same promise of money, of being seen, of mattering to someone. Patricia would come. They always came. The creature had been selecting victims for nearly a century, and she'd developed an instinct for the lonely ones, the invisible ones, the people who'd hollowed themselves out through years of disconnection and were desperate enough to walk into obvious traps because at least the trap acknowledged they existed. I wanted to warn her. God, I wanted to warn her. But I was just a voice in the dark now, one among dozens, my screams no louder than Derek's, my pleas as futile as the secretary's poetry. We were fuel. We were seasoning. We were the price of Celeste's continued existence, the interest payment on a deal made before any of us were born. Some nights, when the feeding was done and Celeste returned upstairs, the creature would speak to us. Not in words, she didn't need words anymore, but in images and sensations and glimpses of what she'd been before Miriam dug her up. Old. So old. A thing that had walked the hills before humans named them, that had slept beneath the earth while civilizations rose and fell above her, that had been worshipped and feared and forgotten and found again. She didn't hate us. That was the worst part. She didn't feel anything about us at all. We were sustenance, nothing more. Bread and water, fuel for the fire. The nights passed. Weeks, maybe months, I'd lost track, like the others warned I would. Above us, Celeste posted on Instagram, attended premieres, gave interviews about her skincare routine and her meditation practice. She talked about authenticity, about living her truth, about the importance of being seen. 32 million followers, watching a mask pretend to be human. And in the basement, we watched back, unable to look away. I'm writing this from a place that doesn't exist on any map. The creature lets me, sometimes. When she's feeling generous, or when she finds it amusing, she allows one of us to reach out, to push words through the veil between where we are and where you are. The plumber did it once, in 1989, left a message on a bathroom wall in a truck stop outside Barstow. No one believed it. No one ever believes it. But I have to try. Patricia Odom accepted the job 3 weeks ago. I know because I watched Celeste read the response letter, watched her smile, that wrong smile, as she counted the bills Patricia had requested as a deposit. $50,000, more than Patricia made in a year at her middle school in Fresno. And not to pay off her divorce lawyer, to put a down payment on a condo, to start over in a life that had stopped feeling like hers. She doesn't know. She can't know. She thinks she's investigating a celebrity's strange behavior, building a report, earning honest money for honest work. She thinks the woman in the photographs is eccentric, maybe troubled, probably harmless. She's been watching for 5 nights now. I can feel her presence at the edges of our darkness, the way the creature feels all the lonely ones. Patricia eats dinner alone. Patricia grades papers in an empty apartment. Patricia calls her mother every Sunday and talks about weather and television because they ran out of real things to say years ago. She's perfect. She's exactly what they need. Tonight, Celeste will write on the window again. Different words this time. She varies them, personalizes them, makes each victim feel special in their selection. But the message will lead to the same place. The hallway, the door, the stairs, the basement. I want to tell you to find her, to warn her, to track down every private investigator, every lonely person, every invisible soul who might receive a manila envelope with a tight label and too much money inside. But I know you won't. I know you'll read this and feel a chill, maybe share it with a friend, maybe lose a few hours of sleep before the morning comes and ordinary life resumes and this becomes just another story you heard once. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. The creature survives because no one believes until it's too late. And by then, you're here with the rest of us, screaming into a void that swallows every sound. My name was Nolan Graves. I was 38 years old. I live in the studio apartment in Glendale, and I let my mother's calls go to voicemail because I didn't know what to say to her. I spent 12 years watching people who didn't know they were being watched, and I never once considered that something might be watching me back. I wanted to be seen. I got my wish. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself, if you're the person who eats alone, who works alone, who has started to feel like background noise in everyone else's photograph, please, call someone. Answer the phone when it rings. Let yourself be known by people who actually exist, who breathe and age and die the way humans are supposed to. Because there are things that feed on invisibility, things that have learned to recognize the taste of loneliness from 1,000 miles away. And once they see you, you'll never be invisible again. You'll just be gone.